Hello, hello. Happy Saturday. Hope you all are having a good start to the weekend. I just had a friend in Ohio who sent me a picture of her snowy yard, and then for us, it's hot and kind of humid. Not hot.
It's as humid as it can get. It's raining.
Right. So we are here to do a little bit more Q&A with you about reactivity. We've gotten some questions in, and we thought we would answer those, and of course answer the questions that anybody else who joins us live would like to ask. You can feel free to post a comment, and we will answer. I'll start out with this one. I can't figure out why my dog is reactive.
So that's a great question. We get it a lot. Of course, one of the things we talk about in the seminars, there can be a lot of different reasons for dogs being reactive. There can be different emotions that they're responding to, and there could be different reasons for having those emotions. One of the things we talk about is the idea that what we think of when we think of reactivity is very different from a lot of trainers, in that we don't only think about dogs aggressively barking at things. That's the most obvious form of reactivity, and there's lots and lots of that. But there are dogs that are reactive in the sense that they're wildly over-exuberant. There are dogs that are quietly fearful, but that is their reaction to changes in their circumstances or someone showing up. So there's lots of different reasons. The really cool thing is, you don't need to know why your dog is reactive. You don't even need to know, quote, what kind of reactivity your dog has. We've had trainers say that, you have to know exactly what kind of reactivity the dog has. Basically reactivity is an over response to things. And so the nice thing is that when you look at it from that broad perspective, the same types of things work broadly for all forms of reactivity in the way that we do it. It doesn't mean that every training method would, because they wouldn't. But I'll tell you a really important thing about this, and certainly, if you were to join our reactivity class, we'd get the opportunity to talk one-on-one and find out a little bit more about your dog, and certainly give some thoughts about what's going on with your dog in particular. But the really neat thing is you don't have to know or understand why your dog is reactive in order to be able to change it. And that's an idea that's very upsetting to some people. Some people in the professional training community, it makes us sound less important when we say that. But what I think is really, really important is that we want to help you go through this experience with the dog. In other words, both of you changing how you're feeling about things. Because when our dog is reactive to stuff, it affects how we feel about the world too. And what we really want to focus on is not just can we change the behavior, but can we help the dog feel differently and feel calmer. So of course it is helpful to know where we're trying to move the needle from, but that's relatively easy to do. The most important thing, though, is that we have to not let the why questions prevent us from taking action. And that's what I see most of the time when people really get into the why. It's really common that I'll be talking with somebody, explaining to them how to change something with the dog, and they go, but why does she do this? And why does she only do this with these people and not those people and whatnot? And it's like, I don't know. I'm not your dog. But I do know how to change it. And sometimes people get frozen by the why. So it's 100% natural to have that curiosity, to have that wonder. Sometimes it's relatively obvious. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's obvious, as an example, that our dog is having a fear reaction, but we got the dog at 2 years of age and we have no idea really what its history is and how it developed that fear. Was it primarily genetic? Was it deficiencies in how it was raised? Or were there really bad experiences? We can't know. But that's why it's a really great thing that we don't need to know that stuff to change. So certainly, as we talk with people and work with people, we develop more of a picture of each dog. And that certainly helps us to some degree with, moving the needle a little bit one way or another with what we're trying to do or how we're going about it. But most of the time, we just don't know why our dog is reactive. It just is.
Do you think that working on impulsivity is a big part of helping with reactivity?
Absolutely. But what does that mean? So, as an example, in the balance training world, working on impulsivity means punishing the dog out of responses to almost everything. Um, and if you have a fear reactive dog, punishing it out of its responses to pretty much everything will quiet the dog down some and will seem to make your life better. It won't typically relieve the dog's fear. The dog typically is still walking around with that fear. Plus now it's got fear and concerns of, oh, geez, when are they going to jump in my ass about one thing or another? So it depends, how you're going about it. Also depends, what you mean by impulsivity. The general idea of obedience training, which we do not teach as a solution to behavior problems, but the general idea of obedience training is to quell impulsivity. Like, don't jump on people. Like, I'm going to make you sit. Don't come over and cause trouble with our guests because we're going to make you lay down on a place. So it really depends how you go about it. But if what you're doing is helping the animal to just have a calmer, easier view of the world, and behavior that's congruent with that, then it can be a great thing. If you go about it in the ways that I know of people normally going about it, it's better than not doing any training at all. It's going to make life, certainly better for the humans, probably overall a little bit better for the dogs, but it's not the best or nicest way to get there. So it depends what people mean, but the general idea, sure, that, like, don't jump onto railroad tracks, don't don't just do crazy things, but what we really want to do in the way that we train is help the dog make those kind of changes by changing their emotions and their thoughts, which change what they want to do, as opposed to one way or another telling the dog what to do and what not to do.
I signed up for the course. Is there anything I can do now to get her to take treats better? Because of her colitis, I'm worried about what she gets. So I will make one suggestion before Mark gives whatever feedback he's going to give. But if you go into our Facebook group, TBTE, Teaching Dogs to Heal, we have a document about different kinds of foods that you might use, and you can figure out what's most appropriate for your dog. Also, tomorrow we have our orientation call, but you'll still have some time to get whatever food you need to get before we get started in class later in the week. So there's a little bit of cushion time, and then your thoughts.
So part of it, maybe about the food you use. So I would imagine at this point you've experimented quite a bit with your dog to find out, what works better for their GI tract than not. I'll also tell you a really great thing that we virtually always see. I can think of one really clear exception in my life, and that was a dog that had a genetic deficiency. But in general, as a dog gets calmer and more relaxed about life, any GI problems they have tend to at least mellow. They may not necessarily go away, although oftentimes they do. So that's just a hopeful thought. But the really big thing about getting your dog to take food better is going to be about, one, not using treats for training, using real food. And two, spreading your dog's food throughout the day, where you're giving the dog food in response to behavior, so that the dog is not getting a bowl of food at one time, or 2 or 3 times, or having a bowl of food just left there. But this creates the sense of scarcity. You're going to give the dog the same amount of food every day, no matter what, or at least offer it. But when you offer that food a piece at a time here and there throughout the day, even though it's going to be, the same amount of food, the dog never gets completely full. so it doesn't get to us like, oh no, I really don't want that food. And the dog starts associating food with behavior. Like, oh, food comes because I do something. And it doesn't mean they're going to do a sit or a down or whatever. They just do something. So the real big thing is going to be wearing a pouch that you can take and put the dog's normal diet into, and using that food throughout the day to reward the dog for behavior. And just the fact that you're spreading the food out throughout the day is going to tend to increase the dog's interest in the food. And it's kind of a neat change to see, and really helps the dog, because now they're trying to figure out, hey, how do I get food? What things lead to food? And again, in our case, it's not going to be obedience. We'll get into how we do that and whatnot. But this is what really gets a dog wanting to do the kind of things that lead to rewards, and not as interested in the things that don't lead to the rewards. So we'll talk a lot about that in the class. You won't be the only one with challenges about that. So we'll be able to talk one-on-one about doing that. But the big thing in the beginning is just spreading the food out throughout the day.
This is what I call purpose-driven behavior.
Yes. It's not just sort of mindless random behavior, but the dog starts to be thinking about, well, what does my behavior do in life? What does it create? And, to some degree, our dogs are already doing that. Just a lot of times they're doing things that we don't like for reasons that we don't think are great. So.
Just want to remind people we're happy to answer your questions. If you have a question, drop it in the comments. I did want to follow up on one thing that you just said, and I can't see the username, so I'm sorry, I won't call you by name.
Yeah, I was going to say the program that we're using right now doesn't actually show your name. It just says like Facebook user or YouTube user or whatever. So if you'd like us to use your name, just make it the first part of your comment or the last part of your comment.
Yeah. But I was going to say that one of the things that we do talk about in the class is we get into, issues with food. So if somebody has a dog on a raw diet, or if somebody has a small dog, because that impacts your training. If somebody has any other kind of issue, that always comes up. We always talk about it, and we do have ideas for it. And also in the discussion about using so much food, because we do use a lot of food in training, certainly for us, you also have to be talking about feeding food, because we don't want to be feeding forever. So
that's a super important thing.
Yeah, some people really get stressed about, well, will I have to do this forever? Is this the thing that maintains my dog in a better emotional state where they're no longer reactive? And no, our goal is to not have to do that forever. So
yeah, what happens is most people who get taught how to use food never get taught how to work away from the food. Sometimes that happens just because they're not in a long enough program for somebody to get to that. But really, we should be starting teaching the humans and the dogs that idea very early on. It's very easy to do. But also in most training, it's not really set up to be able to work away from using the food. The food is the only reason for the dog doing the behavior. And that becomes particularly true if you're using obedience. If you're telling a dog sit down, whatever, they're like, well, the reason I'm doing this is to get the food. If I'm not getting the food, what am I doing it for? What we actually teach you is how to reward things that naturally occur to the dog. So you just bring those ideas more to the front of the dog's mind and increase the frequency of them. And then how to teach the dog to do them for reasons other than the food.
Yeah. Do you know if you'll be doing another reactivity course later in the year? We will. We don't have one on the books yet. I wouldn't anticipate it until, I would imagine, the fall. But
yeah, and I would just suggest a lot of times people want to do sign up for a future program because they're going to be away for a week during the time or some other thing going on. I would really suggest jumping into the program now, even if you have something like that going on. We had actually somebody wrote in the other day while we were on about all the amazing changes that had happened in their dog. And that person put off getting started for a year because, well, my kids are busy with this and that and whatever else. And once she started doing it, she's like, God, I don't know why I ever thought it made sense to not do this for a year. The reality is there's not often a perfect time. Sometimes there are perfectly horrible times, but there's not often a perfect time. And the really important thing about this program is, while it's great to be in every call that we do and working through the material at exactly the same pace as the rest of the class, it's not at all necessary. You get all of this information. If you were, I don't know, say you went on a honeymoon for 2 weeks, wouldn't matter. When you come back, you can pick up where you left off. You're still going to be living with the dog. The way that we train is changing how you think about living with the dog. And so you can start doing that at any time, and you will have all the material from this class. So the weekly phone calls that we do, you'll have the recordings of those. If you're not going to be available for one of our weekly phone calls, but you have a question you'd really like to get a live answer to, not just a typed answer or something, we provide a space for you to put those questions in advance, so that when we do our live call like this, we'll address those questions. So you get to ask your question and you get to answer your question. And the big thing is, this is going to be a 7-week class. Very few people are going to resolve their reactivity in 7 weeks. Everybody will make changes in it. But these are things you'll need to keep working with and keep doing for some period of time. It'll vary from dog to dog, and certainly to some degree on the time and attention that people can put on it. But I would recommend, if this is something that speaks to you, jump in and get it now. You can work the program, however you want to, time-wise, and you'll have all the information. You'll have all the calls. They'll feel just the same if you listen to them 3 weeks later as if you listen to them live, and whatnot.
I was just going to add that while you may not reach your end goal for reactivity in the 7 weeks, what you do have are the tools to help get you there. So you're still working the process afterwards, but you talk a lot about like installing a chip into people, and this is really it. It's an information chip. It tells you how to work the process. And so you're just going to continue to work that process, but we're there in the early stages to mid stages for some of you, really helping to move you along, helping to clarify things, helping to guide you. So
yeah. And this woman that I mentioned who didn't get started for a year, she had a very messed up dog. Dog didn't even like to eat in the house, only liked to eat outside. She would go on walks with a group of other people in her neighborhood with their dogs, and her dog was great with those dogs, but was quite aggressive towards other dogs that they would come by and whatnot. Dog had a lot of reactivity to strangers in the house, and had a good bit of reactivity to some family members and whatnot. When she started the training, she didn't just immediately resolve all her problems, although like every week she was feeling happy that her dog was kind of making new breakthroughs. But it's probably taken 10 months to a year for her to get to where she's at now, where she really just feels like, wow, now I have not only a normal dog, I have a better dog than most of my friends' dogs, in the sense of, we have a deeper relationship, we have better connection. I'm able to get more of the behavior I want, less of the behavior that I don't want, and whatnot.
She actually mentioned, this was really sweet, that her pet sitter said that her dog is actually the best dog that she has.
Best dog she has. Yeah. And in the beginning, she couldn't even have a pet sitter.
Right.
So my big point here is, and this will vary, how it will affect different people, but if this doesn't seem like the perfect time window for you, but it's not perfectly horrible, like you can do some of the work during this time, then I would get involved. In fact, frankly, if you weren't going to start it for 8 weeks, it'd still be worth doing. You can just do the program then. as if it was live. It's no big deal. You'll get the information. You'll work through it. You'll have all the calls and whatnot. The one thing you wouldn't have would be the ability to directly ask us questions, because we will shut down the Facebook group at some point after the course. We don't do it immediately, but usually a week or two after the course. So it'll be archived. All that stuff will still be there. You just won't get the feedback going on. So that's the only thing that you'd really miss. And some people want to redo the course anyway, so that they can go through the live calls and whatnot again. If people do that, they get a 50% discount to do it a second time, because they don't need to pay for all the course material again. They're just paying for the access for those calls. So something to consider. That might make sense for you. It might not.
Do you talk about emotional regulation?
It's the main thing we talk about.
The main thing we talk about. Everything really is through that lens.
Yeah. If you're not focused on emotions and emotional regulation, and not really just emotional regulation, because again, this can come from a really negative perspective, like that we always have to shut the dog down and whatnot. What we're really most concerned, we certainly are concerned about emotional regulation. Can you become calmer? We teach some really powerful relaxation work in the course that will affect all of your dog's life in a positive way. But, I like the example that I used the other day. If you and I work together and I think you did something that was harmful to me, I'm probably going to be angry with you. I'm probably, I'm not going to talk to you, or maybe give you dirty looks or whatever. I might even actively try to do things that cause problems for you, because I think you caused a problem for me. And all that behavior comes out of my emotional response to what I believe you did to me. But if one day I find out from somebody that, no, actually what I think happened was not done by you, and it wasn't even what I thought it was, it's actually something that was helpful to me, I just didn't get that. Well, I'm not still going to be going out to the parking lot and poking holes in your tires, unless I'm just a sociopath. When my emotions change, the behavior that comes from those emotions change. So it's not just about quelling down the dog, especially in the force-based side of training. That tends to be the really common thing. But can you switch the emotions to something that is more productive? Now, sometimes, like as an example, if your dog's reactivity primarily comes from social exuberance, well, we don't want to switch the emotion. We don't want it to go from happy to unhappy. We do want it to learn to be able to just calm itself down, but to feel good in doing that, not to be doing it from a sense of suppression or deprivation.
Yeah. Again, we're happy to answer questions. If you have one, put it in the comment section. Let's see. My dog is not reactive when my spouse is around, and that leaves me feeling like this is all about me. I must be doing something wrong. Do you think that's what it is?
That is such a common story. And no, it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It does mean the dog has a different relationship with different people. Interestingly enough, it absolutely does not mean the dog has the better relationship with the person around whom it is not reactive. In fact, it almost never means that. We often don't know why that dichotomy exists. We just know that it is, and it's a really common thing. There are lots of dog trainers that use that dichotomy, exactly as you said, to say, you're the problem, you're a bad person, you're not doing something right. Well, if it weren't true that doing some things differently could change that, then there wouldn't be any point in training. But there's a difference between, we could change things, we could do some different things to help the dog change its feelings, its thoughts, and its behaviors. That's very different from, you must be wrong, or you must be the problem. This is just a really common thing, especially in like German Shepherds and other herding breeds. They tend to have wildly different relationships with one person than another. And it's really common for them to have the most undesirable behavior, especially aggression, around the person they like the most. So it's kind of funny that it's used as sort of like a negative badge generally amongst trainers, like you're doing something bad, when usually what it means is you're the person the dog feels closest to. So the good thing is we can change all that without you having to become a less nice person to your dog, or without having to berate you about what's wrong with your personality or whatever. Really interesting thing. I just had an example this past week. I have a dog I've been working out with in California for quite a while. It's a German Shepherd, and it's wildly aggressively reactive to all kinds of stuff, particularly from in the house. They have a kind of big front window, and the dog would just lose its freaking mind on everything that would go by it. I mean, completely blow up, its hair all erect and stomping and carrying on, and do this over like everything that would go by all day long. Really, really irritating neighbors, not to mention the poor people who live with the dog. But the one exception, very much like your dog, was the dog would not do this when only the male was home. And of course, this, totally led to several trainers telling the woman that she was the problem and she wasn't strong enough or she wasn't confident enough or whatever else. Meanwhile, none of those trainers were able to help her really change the problem. Interesting thing was the dog did not like the guy and would be overtly aggressive towards the guy in certain circumstances, like particularly in the morning when the guy would get up to go to the bathroom. The dog would often block him in the bathroom, barking and carrying on at him. When he would come home from work, if he was the only one coming, in the house, the dog would act aggressively with him. So even though generally the dog was better around him, it wasn't good. And interestingly enough, one of the earliest significant changes that our training made was the dog started liking the guy, even though the guy did not join in with the training. He didn't like the dog at that point. And as usually happens in these circumstances, he was very offended that the dog didn't seem to like him. And he was very offended that he felt that his wife felt the dog was more important than he was, which she didn't, but she's got to deal with the dog and trying to help the dog and whatnot. But it was interesting. Even without him joining in the training, the dog started acting much, much better with him. Then he started getting involved in the training because now he liked the dog. But the interesting point of all this, just last week, for the first time, the dog started barking at the window while just the guy was home. What's really interesting in that is this comes in the context of over the last month and a half or so, the dog has made really big strides in being non-reactive at the window and not stuck at the window, being able to move around the house and do other things, not just sit there like I got to guard the house all day. So I actually think the dog barking when the guy was home was a sign of the dog emotionally freeing up, not the dog becoming worse. Now, it doesn't mean we love the dog doing that, but it was a small thing. It just, it wasn't a big blow up or anything. But kind of interesting that it was only as the dog has really started to make these big leaps forward with its reactivity around the house that it now has shown a little bit while just the guy was home. So kind of interesting. In our view, that was actually a step forward. But 100% for sure, I don't think you should think or believe that you are the problem. Of course, you have to do some different things to make change, but it doesn't mean who you are or how you're being is wrong.
Yeah. I was thinking about what you were just saying about how, now this behavior has changed to what a lot of people would say is undesirable behavior. Now that the dog is, barking in the presence of the husband. But actually, I mean, from our perspective, it's not, it's a good thing, and it's not hugely concerning in the sense that like behavior is bendable. And now that she has made this change to a different behavior based on her emotions and feeling more comfortable, well, now you can address that new behavior that you don't love so much, and bend it into a different way.
It's not like because the dog barked one time while the guy was home and that's a new different thing, all of a sudden we have this waterfall of bad behavior.
Right.
Because this is coming in the context of the dog getting much better overall.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not really going to be a problem. But it's just interesting when trainers often don't really seem to understand the role of stress in behavior and how it can play out differently. The dog is stressed in one way around the guy and in a different way around the woman. And in both cases, the dog is stressed, and we want to try to reduce and relieve that stress and teach the dog how to not feel stressed by the things that it does. So it's just kind of interesting around the woman as the dog's stress is reducing. It's barking less. Around the guy, it's just had this one incident, which is no big deal. It wasn't even a big thing, but it's a real harbinger of change. That like the dog's like, oh hey, I could actually have my full personality around you. And it's funny because it's a classic thing. Even though the dog didn't like the guy and the dog would, block him in the bathroom sometimes and stuff like that, it was classic. The guy thought that his way of being with the dog was superior to his wife's because the dog was suppressed so much around him and was largely quiet around him. But he 100% felt like, obviously what I do with the dog is better than what you do with the dog. That's common. And that, you can imagine that creates a little marital tension. But it's nice. They get along much better now. They don't fight over the dog, and they actually come together over the dog and enjoy her, in mutual ways, which is really nice.
Well, and for him, it feels a lot better to have a dog who now engages in play and does a lot of social things with him that she did not want to do before.
Well, it's hilarious because actually, when we first started working together, I tried to encourage the woman to have her husband. So we were doing one-on-one online training, to have him come join in one or more of our sessions. And he didn't want to because he didn't like the dog, and he didn't want to be involved in the training, and they'd already been through 3 or 4 other trainers and nothing was changing. And so she was telling me one day about kind of a fight they had had and how he had, really expressed a lot of negative emotions with her and all. And I said, well, why don't you invite him on to come express those with me? I said, because it's really important how he feels. And I want him to know that this is an important element of our training. We want to make this better. So it was really funny because when he came on, no big surprise. He was, kind of gruff and stern. I mean, he looked like a 12-year-old kid who'd been dragged into art class or something, And, but he was very surprised that I wasn't like admonishing him about how he had to be different or whatever. I was just asking about what was his experience and how he felt with that. And, empathizing with that and saying, okay, well, so this is good to know because these are things we want to be able to make some change. You should be able to get up in the morning and not feel like, the first experience you're going to have of the day is this dog blowing up on you and all that. And so, just as happens with the dog, he was very surprised that like, oh, this wasn't a bitch out session. It wasn't giving him homework and all. I just wanted to know what he was experiencing and all. Well, anyway, what was funny was, because of that, he did join in a couple more sessions, and they weren't necessarily sequential. But by the 3rd or 4th time he came on, he was telling me about how he plays this game with the dog and he does this and is that okay? And I'm like, frankly, I didn't exactly love what he was doing, but I love that he was doing something and he was engaging. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I would just do this little change, So, but it's the exact same thing with the humans as with the dogs. When his emotions changed, then the behavior changed, So anyway, it was fun to see.
DJ is like that with me over my husband. He seems more protective with me. I've been told I coddled him too much and should withhold.
Stop being nice to your dog.
And should withhold giving him too much affection or work for affection. What are your thoughts on that? And then there's a follow-up comment. I don't think from the same person. Sorry, I can't tell. Yes, I've heard something like basically to use affection as a reward.
Yeah, well, I mean, everything we do that the dog likes is potentially a reward, whether it's just moving from one place to another, giving them food, petting them, playing with them, whatever else. So we want to look at our interactions in that construct of what are we reinforcing? But not just behavior. What are we reinforcing for thoughts? What are we reinforcing for emotions? And what of that is helpful to us having a better life and our dog having a better life, and what of it is unhelpful. I think a big problem, and I don't mean this as a joke, but dog trainers tend to be far too dogmatic about their thinking. You absolutely must do this, you absolutely must never do that, et cetera, et cetera. Just a simple example is we hear all the time, well, if you have a dog that's, say, a resource guarder, it should never be on your furniture. It has to not have that privilege. And it has to earn that privilege by whatever, like magically not becoming not a resource guard or whatever. These ideas are just really hard and fast ideas that don't really change the dog in the way that we want to change them. So one of the first things that we're trying to do with people is get them to look at their dog differently in two different ways. The first is get them to see behavior in much smaller pieces than people normally do. And this is where using food rewards can really help the humans to learn something different, to see, oh, that's something I could reward. I didn't even think that was something I could reward. So we're going to open that up for you. But the other way that's really important is to look at what's going on with the dog and think primarily of how to affect the dog's thoughts and emotions rather than directly how to get a given behavior. So not so much how could I get my dog to sit, but how could I get my dog to have different thoughts and emotions that would either naturally lead to different behavior that I like better, or that would make it easy for the dog to do different behavior that's easy for me to create and maintain. So, for sure, the affection you're giving your dog, how you're giving it to it and all matters. I just think most people who tell you you're doing that wrong don't really know how to do it right either. They get into a very blockish mentality that, pardon my French, probably feels like shit to you. It usually does when we have owners who are being told, oh yeah, they told me I'm too affectionate with my dog, I stopped doing this and that. Usually they don't have to make the kind of changes that they're being told. Sometimes they do, sometimes some of them. But that restriction on their interaction with the dog tends to feel really crappy. I mean, why do we get dogs? To have emotional relationships with them, right? And then we get told, this particularly comes up with dogs that guard people or dogs that have separation anxiety. You're way too emotional with your dog and you just have to, withdraw and blah, blah, blah. And like they're prescribing for you as a solution, a life with your dog that you don't want. So what kind of solution is that? So there's some truth in what's being said, but I think probably not a heck of a lot of truth in the prescriptions that are being offered.
She says, yes, I was told to almost ignore him and he seemed depressed. It was so sad.
No shit, to be depressed.
and you probably were too. I mean, clearly you were, because you said it was so sad.
Yeah. It can be really depressing. I mean, think about how common it is these days for people to have emotional support animals. And leaving aside, the person that wants to bring their peacock on the airplane with them and whatnot. If you just think about it, there are a lot of people who have realized that the companionship of their dog can be very buoying and stabilizing of their own emotional states. And then somebody says, no, cut that off. That's horrible. It's painful. And it's not much of a solution. You don't really end up with a great result because of it. So you have this horrible prescription that doesn't end up with a great result anyway. So we try to take a much kinder, gentler approach to that.
Yeah.
And a much more productive one.
But in class, definitely bring up the protection aspect, because we can talk about things and ways to address it. So
yeah,
bring
absolutely.
it up in our weekly class. And you may end up bringing it up multiple times, because you may have it might be a multi-step process, so don't be shy about, okay, so this week we focused on this piece of it. So now
it's not like you can only ask about it once, because it should be coming up again and again, because it's going to change on different levels.
Yeah.
The other thing I should mention too, because there may be people listening who have had this experience, or maybe this person has also had this experience. On the force-based side of training, the people who like to call themselves balance trainers, we tend to get a lot of these suppressive ideas, just withdraw your affection and make the dog lay down on a bed forever, or whatever it might be.
Leadership structure.
Leadership structure, and treat them like a turd. But on the positive side, or now they call themselves science-based side, we get a whole nother way of crappiness, which is trainers not trying to change behavior that much, but trying to explain to the owner why your dog is the way it is, and you need to just love it the way it is and tolerate the way it is, and you need to change the circumstances in your life. And, don't allow the circumstances to occur in which your dog is, let's say, aggressive towards your husband. And these become just really burdensome, heavy things too. And nobody likes the way life is being changed, including the dog. And it's often a permanent idea. We get a lot of people who have reactive dogs that work with trainers who tell them, well, go get some film and put it over your windows so the dog can't really see out the windows to be reactive. Who the hell wants to live in a house like that? And, it's a logical idea if it was a beginning point that was going to move us to a completely different point. And, some short while later, we're taking the stuff back off the windows. But unfortunately, it typically is not. This is what's called antecedent controls. Basically take away the thing that bothers the dog. And sometimes you can do that. Sometimes you can't. Most of the time, trying to do it really diminishes our quality of life.
Well, and there's two. I mean, this is the thing.
Yeah.
The long term
keeps shrinking the world for the dog.
In the long term, it doesn't meet either party's needs.
Yeah, absolutely. So we try to take a much more life enhancing way of going about things. We want to open up possibilities for our dogs. Now, sometimes in the beginning, that still might mean that it makes good sense to put a Post-it note over your doorbell outside and say, please text, 443, whatever. But that's not a solution. That may be an aid to training, so that early on, maybe people aren't ringing your doorbell and you get a text, and now you can, put your dog behind the barrier, throw some food down for it or something, go deal with the door, and it all goes much better. But that's a temporary kind of thing. We want to get to where, the sign comes off the doorbell, the gate's not there anymore, and the dog's happy that people are at the door.
Mm-hmm. In regards to the relaxation part of addressing reactivity, what do you think about making the behavior down target behavior falling asleep in some scenarios? Sometimes it's tough to see true relaxed behavior unless the dog falls asleep.
Well, so there's two ways of thinking about that. First of all, the rules already state if the dog falls asleep, that's target behavior, and you don't have to do a second cycle. So that's already baked in the cake. What I would not do, which I think sounds like what you're saying, is make that my criteria, that I'm going to do behavioral down until my dog falls asleep. Your dog may not fall asleep. That might be wildly impractical. I think the bigger issue is don't stress so much about what target behavior is. Get more of a general idea, like, okay, my dog looks, almost like asleep. It's as relaxed as I can imagine. And if you can't see its eyes to see if they're wandering around or whatever else, don't stress about it, call that target behavior. You'll make a lot of progress. And if at some point what you're doing is preventing some progress, we'll probably figure that out. But, we came up with this very specific thing because people were all over the place about what is relaxation. And so we came up with very specific criteria. If you can use those criteria, it'll work great. If you can ballpark and get something really close to it, you don't know if the dog is exactly at that point, don't worry about it. Just consider it as such. It'll work out fine.
I think too, certainly, because we have 3 forms of relaxation that we teach and use. And we're not always looking for the dog to go to sleep. We're looking for the dog to relax down a few levels. Because that's really the key to living life, is to not be so stressed about things in the environment, and to just be more relaxed than you would have otherwise been. So I know that's not really what the criteria of the BD is, but I just wanted to make the point that, relaxation doesn't have to mean crashed out. Relaxation can just be like how you feel after a massage.
Yeah.
And you just feel kind of chill and kind of zen,
Yeah.
versus, I'm crashed out. So that is how we use
Yeah.
relaxation.
So I'll give you a good example of this. So in the behavioral down, the nature of that structure is that the goal is a dog laying down and close to a sleep, like as relaxed as it could get. But that's not the only way that relaxation is useful. Imagine if you were somebody who had anxiety about driving, and particularly as you got into traffic or you went particular places, you got really anxious about that. Well, you could learn meditative processes that would help you to become relaxed, i.e., non-anxious, in the car in those circumstances. It wouldn't be very helpful if it made you go to sleep if you're the driver. So you have to be able to be relaxed and active at the same time. So that's why we teach different approaches to relaxation, so the dog can learn different ways of experiencing relaxation within itself. So sometimes we want a more active form of relaxation. Sometimes we want a more passive form of relaxation. And so this exercise teaches the more passive way, although it has a carryover to active circumstances. You'll see that as you do more and more of them.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other relaxation techniques that we use that are specifically aimed at, hey, don't go to sleep. Still be able to be active and do this particular thing we're doing or whatever. So, if you imagine like, I've done a lot of work with service dogs and therapy animals and stuff, where somebody says, like, for instance, I have a therapy dog, and so our job is to go into this
Facility.
medical facility and visit people and whatnot. But my dog gets anxious about sometimes the people are scurrying around really urgently, or there's, equipment they're pushing around, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if we want to help the dog relax in that circumstance, we want it to still be mobile. We want it to still be able to move from one room to another and one patient to another. So behavioral down would help as a background idea. It would make it easier for that dog to do well. But there's different forms of relaxation that we would teach the dog that it could learn in the active circumstance like that. So again, kind of like you learning to drive and letting go of the anxiety without having to fall asleep to do it.
Mm-hmm. I try to reward behaviors I like, but sometimes food can make my dog's arousal level go up, which seems counterproductive when I'm trying to reward him for being calm or choosing to lay down and settle. Are there times when I should not reward as to not raise his arousal level? I want him to know that these are behaviors he should repeat.
Yeah, so what you're doing would broadly fall into the category of one of the other relaxation techniques we use, which is called differential reinforcement for relaxation. Just means I pay for the calmer behaviors, not the more energetic behaviors at a given point in time. And it's all about change within a moment. So you might be paying for a fairly active behavior, but because it's calmer than what the dog was doing a moment before. But as you get to paying for really calm behaviors, or as might be the case with what you're doing, you're only paying for really calm behaviors, it's very common that the act of terminally bridging and rewarding, so saying yes and rewarding, or clicking and rewarding, will stimulate the dog, because the dog's like, hey, party, we're gonna get some food. Okay? That seems hugely counterproductive. In the beginning, it is not. So even though you may have said yes to the dog laying down, but when you said it, the dog jumped up to get food, the dog still learned something very valuable, which is the idea that just choosing to lay down on its own in a relaxed way could lead to a reward. Now, hopefully you would not say yes if the dog laid down like, boom, where's my food? You just act like you don't see it. That's not calmer behavior. That's not what you're trying to pay for. But
can I just say,
yes,
that's a physical position. It is not
it's not
calmer
relaxing.
behavior.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
so these are the other things that you have to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is the idea of paying for actual relaxation, not positions. And unfortunately, a lot of relaxation techniques are really more about position. And some dogs will learn to relax really well from them. Some dogs will not learn to relax well from them. So if you're actually paying for relaxation, for calmer behavior than what the dog was doing a moment before. When you say yes, you may what we call blow up the behavior. But in the beginning, that's not terribly important. You still carry through with the reward. If the reward is for the dog laying down somewhere, make sure you put the food where the dog's head was when it laid down. So even though it may come to you, just walk right past it and put the food where it was. But as you want to make progress, you will get to a point where you'll have to make some adjustments to help the dog learn to stay relaxed as it's getting rewarded. But not rewarding would not be a solution to that. Not rewarding just prevents you from making more progress. It's just like, oh, well, we kind of ran into a wall with this idea. It's helped us some. It's gotten us this far, and we can't get any further. So that's something we particularly get into our L1, our level 1 introduction to TBT. We get in deeply to all 3 primary relaxation techniques that we use. But it's a logical idea that, oh, I probably shouldn't reward the dog because that kind of blew that up. But actually, all you end up doing is just stopping training at that point, really. So there's different ways that we gotta go about that.
We do get into it a bit in the reactivity class, though. Yeah,
but not with the depth that we do in the L1
for sure. All right, so I don't see any other questions, but I do want to ask before we go, or remind people that if reactivity is your thing, it's your life struggle right now.
Reactivity is your jam.
Our class closes tonight, so you'll want to hop on and join us. And if you have questions for us about the class, we are more than happy to answer them because, I mean, for us, it's a really fulfilling class, but more importantly, it's been really fulfilling for those who've joined in. They've enjoyed doing it with other people. They've enjoyed having the momentum. It's one thing to do something and struggle on a daily basis on your own. It's another to actually like be able to have a touch point every day.
Well, it's amazing how many times somebody is really having a downtime. Maybe other things in life are really becoming overwhelming and they're not doing everything they want to with the dog. Or maybe, the dog's just had a bad couple of days or whatever. And it's amazing how many times we hear somebody end up going, oh my God, I'm so glad to hear Julie talk about that and that you didn't just scold her for not doing her work and, blah, 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 because I'm having the same thing. So there's a lot of different ways that the group help people. But the big thing I would say to you, if you're here listening to this, obviously you have reasons you would benefit from this. Freaking jump in and do it. You'll be so happy you did. Why wait till later for your life to get better, and for your dog's life to get better? So that would be my primary thought.
Yes. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for joining us. And we will see some of you. We know some of you have already joined our class. So we're looking forward to getting to know you. And certainly DJ will be an interesting case and fun to work with. So.
Oh, and for anybody who, has joined this challenge, joined in some of these calls, and you're not going to join us in the reactivity class, I would suggest, check in on our Teaching Dogs to Heal group. You can get lots of information there, especially if you go to the top of the page where all of the, what do you call them, the chapters or whatever.
The guides.
Guides. There's a ton of information in there and all. And maybe something else we're doing at a different time, or the same thing we're doing at a different time will be a better thing for you to join in with us. Or maybe you'll just, kind of hang out and take advantage of the free stuff and make some nice changes in your life.
Yep.
So I'm glad to have you here either way.
All right. Have a great weekend, everyone. Take good care.